tell you how exciting it is to have a podium, because normally when I come to events, they stick me in the back row and hope I'm not going to say anything. So here I am, and I get to have the table. So we had a brief discussion and talked about issues that we thought were important, but I did not give them the questions ahead of time. So this is completely unscripted. I hope you guys are ready. They're probably not as bad as being before your school board, so don't worry too much. You all ready? And a thumbs up? Yes. Okay, I see 4. Gosh, I feel like I'm on an airplane. I need a verbal yes from all of you before we... Okay, so I'm going to start. Let's get this one out of the way. We're here in Washington, D.C., you know, where our politics are like super functional at the moment. So try though we might, we can't really escape the very divisive discourse and rhetoric, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, over impeachment, immigration, Iran. I can keep going with I's. Can you just briefly say, how do these trends influence what's happening in your school district, and how do you sort of try to mitigate the ill effects of, you know, very negative discourse? Yeah, yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just speak.
So the discourse, I think it's impacting some of our most marginalized families. So regarding, in Eugene, we've received quite a few Guatemalan families coming in, and just the trauma that your kids have coming into our buildings and the support that we need to do for wraparound services for our families. I think that's been my number one concern this past year, is the impact of kids not feeling safe on our campuses, and how do we as building leaders and district leaders provide that safety net for our communities, because we are, again, sanctuaries. Our schools are sanctuaries, and making sure that all families feel safe and respected. And that's something that we've done quite a bit with resolutions, but also a lot of staff trainings, and a lot of community building in terms of how to work with our most marginalized families.
And very much like my colleague, and that is to ensure that we are serving all of our families, and that they feel a part of who we are, and that they are educated in a safe and nurturing environment. I'd go back to say, you know, Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And how do we keep our families and our young people and the teachers and the staff members focused on our core mission of teaching and learning when you have a lot of other things going on around the school and outside of the school in particular. So it's the core mission of teaching and learning, and making certain that we have that element where all young people, as my colleague said, that they feel safe, that they're in a nurturing environment, so that we can take care of our core business of teaching and learning. You can't take care of the core business of teaching and learning unless we focus on the social and emotional aspect of learning. And so it's really both parts that you need. It's more difficult to do the social and emotional part when you have a lot of disruption outside of the school environment and the politics and so forth. So remaining true to our core business, but recognizing that there's a huge impact, and the work that we need to do on social and emotional learning to ensure that all learners and families feel a part of the learning environment, and that they're in a safe and nurturing place.
And before you two respond, I would add, I think that this is equally a challenge for teachers, right? Because, so for example, I wrote a story not too long ago about how are teachers dealing with teaching the impeachment, right? I mean, this is like a key constitutional, I mean, it really should be front and center in your civics classes. And some of the teachers I was talking to said, we are so afraid to touch this right now because of, you know, how, I mean, so much of this is so emotional for so many parents, right? So can you talk a little bit about what the challenge has been for your educators as well as your students?
Absolutely, and first starting with our students, the all is all, so that includes everyone, from the most marginalized students to those who are not marginalized, and making sure that they all feel welcomed and a part of the organization. And our vision is that all students will be well-rounded and prepared for the future, and that means all. So we believe that strong relationships in our community and collaboration with all of our families in our community really help to ease the pain and strife that they're experiencing experiencing from the rhetoric of our nation right now. In terms of teachers, we've had that very experience where teachers have tried to work on civics in our school, and the children and their interpretation of the political arena actually resulted in a very hard lesson for teachers and our students, because they delve into the digital age and make recordings of things that often get out and misrepresent what they were actually doing. And so there's more than just the political lesson that has to be taught. It's also how to be respectful of everyone's viewpoints when you are working in this arena, because they're not experiencing that right now. They're experiencing a lot of yelling and hollering and going back and forth, and collaboration and partnership seems to be, it's not the norm anymore. It's really the exception. And so teachers are really challenged with teaching content and then building the capacity for our kids to accept viewpoints that are not like their own. And I think that's a really important lesson for kids to learn.
I get to go last, so I could say they took my answer. I would say all the same things. I would add two things. One, schools used to be separate from government. So when we have a very large immigrant population in Mineola, and it's transient, so we are constantly indoctrinating and registering new kids. Government used to be separate from school. You know, when you're dealing with the SNAP program or getting food stamps or having to deal with license or something outside of school, parents were a lot more leery. Now it's filtered into school. So even when they see school as almost a governmental entity, when it wasn't like that. So that's a hard, just personally, morally, it's a hard thing to grapple with when you're indoctrinating families into your community. So we put a lot of thought into having many bilingual people along the way for students to interact with, to kind of ease into the school system. The second piece on the civic side, I would say social media is very much the fuel for the discourse. And I think a lot of people in social media are in these little echo chambers where they only hear their own viewpoint, and that's what circles around, and they constantly hear that. And politics has become the same thing. It's just us and them. So it's a good opportunity when you're discussing impeachment or politics to bring it back to kids and what they do in their own communication circles and social media about these echo chambers, and just use it as a teachable moment like we do everything that we do, and try to bridge that gap.
Don't worry, you get to go first for the next question.
I knew it.
Okay, so we are now 4 years, actually a little bit more than 4 years into ESSA. Now when this law was passed in 2015, I mean, it was gonna be flexible, people were going to get to do all kinds of cool things, it was going to move away from the big bad old days of NCLB. Did that happen? What do we need to be thinking about in the future? What additional changes do we have to make? And did your state do a good job rolling out new plans? Oh, good. He's laughing. That's always good.
Okay. I think ESSA did not live up to the promise we thought it would be. I think it's more of the same from NCLB, partly because the states haven't really took advantage of the innovative languages that were written into the law, and a lot of the plans that went in were not much different from the NCLB plans. I look really to the accountability system in general, that we put so much emphasis on summative exams, and many districts chase test scores, and in doing so we do a disservice to kids. And our job as superintendents is to try to find that balance between not teaching to a test. Good teaching will beget results, so how do we ensure that we have good teaching happening and still do all the other things that are very important in educating kids that have nothing to do with content, has to do with communication and socialization and respecting one another and listening to opposing viewpoints, and grappling with all the things that kids grapple with. That's what makes a school system great, not what they score on a summative exam.
So, and of course, I would agree with everything Michael has mentioned. I think ESSA sort of boils it down to the simplest form that's easy for calculation and production of an accountability model, and overlooks that the testing, a summative assessment, is an incomplete picture of what students are capable of doing. And so, not unlike what Michael said, the innovative practices that are permissible are not statewide. And in Georgia, I'm fortunate in Georgia to have a state superintendent who is very interested in innovation and assessment innovation, and a governor who is sees it from the same lens as well, and has looked at our accountability tool and recognized that we're just regurgitating one assessment multiple times and looking at the same results in different ways, that there's a much more robust way to do that. And we're actually working on that across the state, and there are pockets of school systems that are working on addressing accountability through the lens of what does quality look like in a school system. It is not an assessment. It is not a one day, one moment, one time look. It is much broader than that in scope, and it matters that we are missing the opportunity that exists within the legislation, but I think it just all boils back to the simplistic viewpoint of how do we communicate to our communities in a way that they'll understand. Well, we assign A, B, C, D, and F, and we rank order our systems, which the unintended consequence is that it creates competition instead of collaboration between and among school systems. And so I think that we've missed the mark and missed some opportunities, but I'm really glad that in Georgia we're working on it, and we are a work in progress in terms of what does quality look like and how do we tell the story through the lens of our children and the great accomplishments that they have. Our kids do such remarkable things. We've got kids who are winning Braille competitions, and they're the #1 in the state when it comes to visually impaired students and reading Braille. But the model that we have currently doesn't capture that, and I think that's a real important point that we need to consider as we think about what comes next. What's the next generation?
In Oregon, I think we did a great job at trying to gather information and submittal of the plan. I think the state superintendent at that time did a very nice job. I think it has provided some level of flexibility. We haven't taken advantage of that flexibility, as my colleagues has mentioned, and we do have this hangover from No Child Left Behind that's going to be present for some time. And I think, as stated by my colleagues, it's that competition. It's a competition, and the way the communities and the public views public schools right now. The public view of public schools has been not great, and I think this is part of it. It starts pitting people against people. And again, what defines success? As my colleague stated earlier, I think there needs to be multiple measures of success that we're not taking advantage of right now. And that's causing the issue, I think. It's a competition and the way it's portrayed that we're looking at different, not growth model, but looking at this other model that's still here, and which is not really a good understanding of what's happening in public schools. So.
I certainly agree with what my colleagues have said, and I would add that I think that as a state we have begun to look at our assessment system in particular. For example, where we're looking at multiple indicators now of success and not just the standards of learning assessment within itself. So we, as a state, we're moving in that direction. I think, again, as colleagues have said, you have the flexibility, but to ensure that at the state level, we're maximizing the flexibility that's there. So as a Commonwealth, in terms of Virginia, we're beginning to move in that direction. We, as superintendents and instructional leaders and teachers, we realize that we have a reduction in the number of assessments that we provide students based on the state's accountability system. And so we are moving in that direction. I think it's difficult when you know one system, and whether we have had a level of total commitment to that or not, the change, that's a shift in a mindset. And so we're experiencing that shift where we're moving more toward innovation. For example, in Virginia now, we have the profile of a Virginia graduate. As we focus on collaboration, communication, and creativity, and the like. And we realize that we can't measure all of that in terms of a multiple choice assessment. So school divisions are now moving toward what we call a balanced assessment framework. And within the context of that balanced assessment framework, we're encouraged by the State Department as well as by other leaders in the Commonwealth to have some challenge-based assessments that we develop within the school division that will move toward the innovation. If we really want our young people to be college, career, and life ready, we will not measure whether they are truly college, career, and life ready by a multiple choice assessment. So we're beginning to see that at the state level and in our divisions as well, that innovative thinking around the assessment and looking at multiple indicators of success, not just the standards of learning assessment within itself. So we're beginning to see that we're not where we need to be, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and having industry leaders at the table to help guide some of that discussion, I think we will get there faster rather than operating in silos where we're trying to solve this and approach balanced assessments in terms of the framework and challenge-based assessments in silos. We need industry leaders at the table engaged in those conversations because they know the real challenges in terms of workforce and what young people need in terms of high demand, high wage jobs. So.
Okay, I'm really excited about this next part. Did you guys all play Mad Libs growing up? Remember that? Fill in the blank? Okay. So I'm going to give you a sentence with a blank, and you're going to help me fill it in. So imagine this is your mission statement. We want to prepare students for college, careers, and blank. And the reason I'm asking this, by the way, is because college career readiness has been sort of our mantra for the last 10 years. We've always thought it was incomplete, and I'm wondering what you guys think. So any of you can start, but we want to prepare students for college, careers, and blank.
And life.
Say more.
Because when we think of college and careers, we think of beyond that, we want our young people to be able to, yes, communicate, collaborate, and to be very creative in terms of how they approach, but we want them to be successful in life, to understand and to appreciate others' points of view and diversity, to really understand and to have an appreciation for diversity and all that it offers. And so it's not just about the content, but I need to know how to work as a member of a community and to be a part of that community. So it is about life and understanding and appreciation and having an appreciation for diversity and so forth. So when I say life, it's all of those components.
All the things.
All the things.
All the things.
And I would just say on top of life is the ability to be able to have students define their own success and the skill sets to be able to find their own success in an ever-changing landscape that is our world.
It doesn't have to be one word.
It doesn't have to be one word.
Okay.
I mean, it's good if you have one word that perfectly
you won't get one word, sir.
that perfectly encapsulates, I'll take it. You know, the mot juste, right? But if you don't have that, that's okay.
Go for it. No? I would say an ambiguity. So
I like it. Very good. My editor would hate that, by the way. Anyway.
Yes. The pace of change in our society, particularly with technology, and how that affects the world of work, life in general. We have to teach children to be flexible and nimble with change, and the ambiguity piece of what the world's going to be and how they're going to fit into it. period.
See, that wasn't so bad, was it?
And for me, college careers and to be successful with 21st century skills like collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, being able to not just plan for the future as a future thinker, but to see the future and begin to think about what the problems might be and be able to solve them and lead a pathway to become a future thinker. And there are a myriad of 21st century skills that will help our kids be solutions to global problems like poverty, like whether or not countries have water that is able to be consumed. All of those pieces our kids are connected to due to the globalization and the internet and all of the ways that we can just dial into anybody we want to across the world. And so our kids need to be equipped with the skills so that they can become the problem solvers outside of the college and the career, being creative and problem solvers that can engage in the global community.
So let's say we had life, we had ambiguity, problem solving, I think I could sum up, and
Success.
success. There we go.
Skills.
Success broadly defined. Okay. When we had our sort of cheat session before our conversation, two of you, Samantha and Gustavo, you both mentioned that teacher recruitment and retention were ongoing and consistent challenges. And we do know nationally fewer people are going into teaching, fewer people are coming out of it. Samantha, I think you said you have to rely on a lot of smart people, but they're coming in through sort of alternative programs, so they don't necessarily have the teaching skills.
Yes.
Can you all just say a little bit about, what are the one or two big challenges on the teacher front, and how do you address those?
Are you talking about related to teacher shortages or just in general?
In general, but I think for you it
that's-
would be very much like recruitment and keeping them and making sure they're effective.
Yes,
Yeah.
teacher shortages are a huge problem, I'm sure across the nation, but specifically in our community. And it's caused us to have to rethink about our professional learning for our teachers, because it used to be that we spent a lot of our time and resources in teaching the fine-tuning of skills. But when you're recruiting people who have degrees in mathematics, but not necessarily the pedagogical background of teaching and learning, we've had to invest our resources in providing for our staff members, what does a lesson plan look like? How do you write a lesson plan? What does the structure of the period of the day look like? What is classroom management? How do you build relationships with children? All of which are a very important part of the structure of a school day. And we've not been accustomed to having to do that as much, because many of our teachers in the past have come from teacher prep programs that have laid the foundation for that work. And while we have these brilliant people who are now interested in the education profession, because you were an accountant in your past life does not make you a strong teacher in a classroom. Without you can have all the knowledge, but the children might not receive it because of the techniques that you're using. And so it has been a challenge for us. And then geographically where I'm located, the retention piece is also problematic, because I'm surrounded by school systems that have more financial resources. And so just as I train these teachers who are non-traditional educators and I get them all schooled up, then the counties around me take them from me. So it's just a revolving door, and just to take it just a little tiny bit further, when we talk about equity and we talk about student achievement and progress and growth, when you think about systems that have that perpetual cycle of in and out, no fault of their own, it makes it really hard to have a conversation about achievement, because it looks different than perhaps the system who has very few teacher turnover numbers. Our teacher turnover rate, while improving because we're taking steps to do all kinds of things to retain our teachers, is about 17%. So every year the teacher churn is about 17% in our district, and that is a tough challenge that we face. And then you couple that with really smart people who need pedagogical instruction, you see your resources being moved differently than perhaps 5 or 10 years ago.
So for us, it would be the promotion of the profession. How do we promote education as a profession when less kids are getting into college, universities, wanting to become teachers? And that's something that's been happening in the state of Oregon, where less kids are being enrolled in pre-service programs. So how do we get kids excited to have education be the career path? And again, it's just not happening as much as it could. So I think we owe it to the profession to be champions as superintendents for the profession. And how do we do that? Through pathway development at your school districts, through working with local universities in relationship building to have these pre-service programs, be able to have the teachers that we need to work right from the get-go in our schools. I think that's something that, so there's two things. It's just a promotion of the profession, but also the relationship building with universities to ensure the pre-service programs are effective. And that's something where I think they're getting better in some areas and not so much in others. So how do we continue to work with our university partners to ensure that, again, we're not doing that twice?
Right.
So,
And I would jump in, as my colleagues have already said, I think it falls within how do we attract, but also develop and retain an exceptional staff. And so with that, the teacher induction program or programs to ensure that we're enabling our teachers to understand the landscape and what they need to do and how best to do that. And so the teacher induction program, I think, is critical. I would add with the teacher induction in terms of as a part of retention and also attracting, I would say also compensation, because we're now at a time where the economy is flourishing, and it's difficult to attract and to retain when we look at the current compensation in terms of the structures that exist. I think Samantha said it quite well. When you look at the retention piece from a compensation standpoint, your neighbors or neighboring school divisions who can afford to pay more. Or in school divisions, for example, where we have 62% or more of our young people who are impacted by poverty, teachers who may determine or feel that teaching in another school division where you have a lower in terms of the impact of poverty is a lot lower and not at a 62% or 50%, then they would choose to go there. And so compensation within itself, I think we have to look at that at the national level, but I think locally also, and certainly at the state level. What can we do to really compensate our teachers as a part of attracting, developing, and retaining?
I would just add we have had good success with the residency program with the neighboring universities. So we have student teachers for a full year, and they do everything our teachers do. They go through the same PD, they go to the same meetings. So we know pretty well at the end of the year who's going to have success immediately if we hire them as a teacher. Of course, we don't have enough residents to fill all the vacancies, so it kind of pitters out a little bit. And the other piece I would just say is a little respect. I think the profession is beaten up, and we need to stop doing that. And a lot of the reason why people don't choose to become teachers is the way we treat teachers. And a little more respect would go a long way in attracting our next generation of teachers.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate Jeffrey's point. I think the economic point is actually very important. In fact, there's some research, and I couldn't tell you the authors of it now, that found that right after the Great Recession, school districts were able to make hires of more skilled teachers because the labor market was not strong. And so there were more people applying for positions, and that they were able to be choosier in effect. So now that we are in a boom town, I think that compounds just the general decline in sort of overall bodies. So I think that's a very good point. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think I'm going to throw it over to you guys. But All of you also talked about equity challenges in your district. And what I'd like for you to do is explain to us, how do you define equity first? And then second, what is the most important thing you're doing now to address that problem?
We're all looking here, so I'm happy to get started. And so when we talk about equity, for me, it is about access and opportunities for young people, all young people. And so I think that our mission statement, certainly as a school division, we embody the understanding of equity when we say in collaboration with our community. We're going to focus on academic excellence for every child, every day, whatever it takes. And so for me, that is about access and also opportunities. And when we think of that, I think that you certainly have policies that we can put in place. There are practices, but I think we also have to really examine what I consider to be products, outcomes for young people around equity. It's one thing to have policies in place, it's another to have practices in place, but we should have goals and focus on specific outcome measures around equity as well. So what are we doing around equity in Hampton City Schools? For example, through the lens of equity, it starts with making certain that we have a guaranteed viable curriculum throughout the division, and that we have a systems approach with that. It can't be in pockets where you have a guaranteed viable curriculum, and in some schools and in other schools, you have a curriculum that you're not willing to stand behind. So one curriculum in terms of a guaranteed viable curriculum, a robust student achievement data system so that you can get real-time data and make decisions relative to student performance, and where you need to deploy resources throughout your school division. The second thing I think around equity, it's not just about looking at the definition, the policies and practices and outcomes, but when we look at the curriculum. But the second thing that I would say is to make certain that the climate and the culture piece, social and emotional learning, having a systems approach around social emotional learning, and understanding that that is about equity as well. And then the third piece of that would be professional development, high professional development, aligned professional development based upon what you have set as goals and expectations around the curriculum and what you expect of young people. Young people should know, understand, and be able to do the following. And we should align our professional development programs to ensure that teachers and support staff members are provided the necessary training as it relates to that. And the last thing that I would say around access and opportunities in our school division, so we're focusing on that. That may be my ding to say it's over, Jeff. But the last thing that I would say in terms of access and opportunities.
They didn't give me a hook, so don't worry.
Would be we offer dual enrollment. We have experienced 642% in the last 4 years of the number of dual enrollment credit hours taken by young people, and we have experience with that. That accounts for about 11,000 dual enrollment credit taken by young people. So access there. Also the academies of Hampton, where we have 16 wall-to-wall academies, and we have 41 career pathway options for young people. That is about access and opportunities for young people to learn in smaller learning communities, where we're focusing on high wage, high demand jobs of the future. And so we're providing that particular opportunity for young people. So when you look at equity, equity is about access and it's about opportunities. It starts with our mission. You can have policies in place. We should have practices in place. But at the end of the day, we need to have products in terms of outcome measures for young people around equity as well. And so with our final comment in terms of our student data system around equity, I'm proud to say that we have focused on our graduation, on-time graduation rate. We, in 2015, had 88% of the class of 2015 who graduated on time. And now we have 92.73%. Our dropout rate in 2015 was at 5.1%. And now we are at 1.26% in terms of the dropout rate. And so equity along the way in terms of how we examine the data and then what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to use our resources to ensure that we're preparing young people to be college, career, and life ready. In 2015, we had 41% of our schools that were fully accredited. And today, based upon our robust data system and the willingness to make hard decisions and how we use the data and apply and deploy resources, we moved from 41% to 55% to 66% to 93% of our schools fully accredited to today we have 100% of our schools fully accredited without conditions. That is about equity because behind all of the numbers, there are students in terms of faces and names. So it is about access. It's about opportunities for young people, policies, practices, products in terms of outcomes for young people.
And I define equity the same in terms of access and opportunity with regards to using information, using an equity lens to be really intentional about how we make an impact for our young people, for our students. And also, we have an equity index in my district in terms of differential funding, depending on need. Not just title funding, but differential funding across the whole spectrum to ensure that we're targeting kids' needs and meeting kids where they're at, knowing every kid by name and need is equity, but to be able to provide engagement for students, much like Jeffrey mentioned, having different pathways for kids. You know, the future of education, I feel, is a school without walls. There's going to be kids are going to be able to have blended learning, kids are going to have different pathways, you're going to have dual language, dual credit opportunities that we have in my district with the university, but also the community college. And you're going to have a lot of different experiences for students and be able to keep kids there and using information to drive decision making and providing a solid understanding and groundwork at the elementary level with multi-tiers, systems of support for our kids to make sure that we take care of our students. A lot of our kids come to our schools with trauma. Is being able to work with our students with their mental health needs, support needs, and also their parents, bringing their parents in and making sure that we're meeting their needs. But again, I define equity as providing access for opportunity to all kids in a very intentional manner, and you need to have the data sets to be able to prove that, to be able to look at that, and be able to train our staff to really know how to work with data. But you have that, but you also have the funding sources to be able to provide interventions and extensions to support those staff members at the building level in a really intentional manner.
In the Newton County school system, equity is so important that it is one of the tentacles of our strategic plan. It is about the work. It really helps us to keep our eye and focus on that. The definition is the same. It's opportunity and access. And we sort of looked at it slightly different. We have a poverty rate in our school system of about 71.6%. And so my team and the community have worked really hard to peel back the layers of equity to get at the root cause. And it really has boiled down for us to poverty. And then developing a community-wide response that helps all of our families experience the quality of life that they wish to have, and removing the barriers and connecting our resources. And so we've got a lot of helping organizations in our community, but our families impacted by poverty can't access them because they live so far away. And so we also know that our families impacted by poverty are also not ever sitting down at the table with people who are different from them. They eat dinner with people who are similar to them. So we have set up a system where people in our community partner with families. We call them neighbors, and the people who are the partners are navigators. So we have a navigator-neighbor system. And so all the while that we're doing that, though, we are still working on the symptoms of a lack of equity and trying to address, for the adults, implicit bias. And we're working on a system-wide response to implicit bias and helping people understand that it's okay that you have implicit bias. We all have it. It is what you do with with it, and how those biases make your decisions about children and families and things that happen in our community, how it interferes with that and perhaps makes you make decisions or judgments about people. And so we are working on moving from being poverty aware in our community, where you carry with you stereotypical viewpoints of people impacted by poverty. You hear the old, well, how does she have a cell phone but can't pay her light bill? And so that's a stereotype, and it speaks to this rhetoric that people impacted by poverty are not hard workers, and that is not true. It is so far from the truth. And so to get at equity, you've got to get at the root, and the root for most equity issues is poverty. And so on a national level, I think this is the first time in the history of our country that more than 50%, close to 60% of our students that we serve in our communities are impacted by poverty. So if you want achievement results to improve, you've got to get at the root of the problem, and then provide all of the supports that you heard Gustavo and Jeffrey speak about in terms of looking at allocation of resources and ensuring that equal is not the same as equity. And so making sure that schools that have more needs get different resources. Also thinking about your own biases. The families have their viewpoints and we have our viewpoints, and how to navigate that very tumultuous marriage that we have, and trying to ensure that we get at equity through the lens of poverty, so that all of our families and children can experience success throughout their experience in our schools and then ultimately in our community. When you solve the problem of poverty, you change the vibrancy of your community. People then want to be a part of your community. Business and industry will move into your community. It's an economic driver. We're so engrossed in this work that even our Chamber of Commerce and our economic development team have a hashtag that is eradicate poverty, and we call that our big, hairy, audacious goal. We know that it's going to take us a long time to get there, but if our county commissioners and our city councils and our clergy and our school system and all of the people in our community have that one goal in mind, we believe at some point in the near future that equity won't be an issue for us anymore, because the families in our community will have that which they need to be successful.
So I think Mineola is an interesting case study for equity. You know, when I started in the district as SUP 11 years ago, my first job was to close 2 schools. And we were faced with that decision because we were hemorrhaging money. We had 3 elementary buildings with less than 200 children in it. Even in a tiny little district, where you lived meant different opportunities, and we needed to fix that. So by closing 2 schools, we fully reconfigured in a quasi-Princeton plan, and we reinvested the savings back into the district, which enabled us to do things like one-to-one iPads. We have a very robust dual language program. We started that when we abandoned our FLES program in the elementary school, but it really was to assimilate our non-English speakers quickly and efficiently into the community. The byproduct is 40% of our district opts into a dual language program, and of the 2/3 of the whole program are English speakers. So we have a full day pre-K for every child. We just started that in September in our budget. We pay for that in our budget from the savings. So, and we know the benefits of pre-K. So in a small district, it's a little easier to ensure equity and make decisions around how you implement your resources. I think the second piece, the piece to it as superintendents is we need to share a little more. You know, how does someone with resources help Samantha's district? So I think we have this capability of sharing resources via OER or content that we use. We make, my board actually passed resolution to make our badge book an open-ended resource. So it's free for all, anyone can use it. And I think really sharing is the greatest ally for equity, and we need to start promoting that instead of this competition where I can't share something with you because your scores may go higher and then I look bad, so I'm not going to do it. And it's kind of silly. If we're all in public education, we need to start embracing that.
Well, I can talk all day, but I would rather actually have you guys pose some questions to our finalists here. I don't know, do we have a mic, or, well, you can all just use your teacher voices, yeah. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so glad to meet the four of you. My name is Sharon Adams-Taylor, and I'm an associate exec at AASA. And the moderator stole my equity question. I'm trying to ask you, Samantha, what a certified poverty coach is, but you illustrated that very beautifully in your response. Jeffrey, ASA has an apprenticeship initiative that we began a few months ago. It's going good like gangbusters. And I was reading about the 16 academies you have, 44 pathways, all 10th graders enter that?
Yes, ma'am.
Across the 4 high schools. You talked about some of the strategies and how that was successful with equity, but I want to know, what do parents think about it?
Yeah, and so we've gotten some good feedback from parents, and obviously, with some of our parents, the challenge has been for them to understand academies and career pathways, and so we've spent more time certainly marketing that, because often parents understand career pathways and academies, more so career pathways, based upon their point of entry 15 or 20 years ago and the industry as it looked then. So we have educated our community that indeed, when we're talking about career pathways and academies, it's through the lens of high demand, high wage jobs and careers that we're preparing young people for. And the bottom line, we have said, it is not so much about the career, it's more so about the stackable credentials and certifications and the transferable knowledge and skills that you get as a result. We are a high poverty school division. More than 62% of our young people are impacted by poverty. And so, we have parent sessions at each of the high schools. Certainly for the freshman class and also for the sophomore class and so forth. Good feedback because it's around equity. The fact of we offer these academies and career pathways, and we provide transportation. So you can decide, we ask young people to identify their top 5. Over 90% get their first choice. And we provide shuttle transportation, so transportation is not an issue. I had that conversation with the board, and we realized, based upon our student achievement data, we had pocket academies, and attendance was higher, suspension rate was lower, GPA was higher, all of the right indicators in terms of success.
So why not do it?
And so we said, why not for everyone? And now we have over 450 different industries at the table. We have business councils at each of the schools, and the business leaders are helping to shape and reshape the curriculum. I have said we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And so the industry leaders, they are at the table helping us to redesign the curriculum in terms of the skills and the sequencing of that, and providing young people with mentorship and internship opportunities. Aside from that, my last comment on that, we have teachers also involved in externships. And as a part of that, we ask and provide teachers opportunities to go out into the industries and to learn, and then to bring back what we call a challenge-based opportunity for the class, and to work with teachers in your school for that. And we have an extended learning component that we run alongside during the day and also over the summer, where young people, we had over 500 young people this past summer involved in our extended learning for the summer, and they were working with various industry leaders and solving real life problems, which was wonderful. So good feedback from parents. if I were to say that I have 100% of them saying, go forth, that would not be accurate. Certainly we have pockets along the way, but we see it as our responsibility to educate and to market, especially if we're going to talk about equity and use and understand that it's a lift for everyone in our school division. Because I know the career or the job of my parent or the relative in my home, but phlebotomy I may not. Surgical technology I may not. And I may not in terms of understand welding as a career. And that is an option for me as well as a launching pad for something else that I may want to do. So thanks for the question. Yeah.
Okay, I know you had a question.
Yes, my name is Gladys Cruz, and I am the district superintendent at Bose's upstate New York, about 6 miles from Albany, New York. And my question is for all of you. What do you believe is the role, if any, of school systems in developing engaged citizens and ensuring that our democracy continues?
Oh, I can take that one. So there was a great New York Times article by Thomas Friedman about a year ago saying, kind of quoting the College Board to say there are two critical things that kids need to know: computer science and civics. And if they knew both of those well into the future, that they would be best prepared for life after high school. And I don't think it's that simple, but I agree with the premise. I think computer science is critical, and we need to start that, and we're losing that battle across the country. But in terms of civics, we don't teach the Constitution the way we should, in my opinion. And I think if we gave all of our children the citizens exam, we would not get very good results. And it's
There are
a little-
about 20 states that do this
yeah,
right now, by the way.
It's
So-
a little scary. So at a minimum, our kids should pass the citizens exam. So I think that we need to have a concerted effort to produce citizens. Because when you think about the origins of public education, what was the purpose of it? It's turned into, making a workforce, but that really wasn't the original intent. The original intent was to make citizens of the democracy. So I think we need to, pay a little attention to that.
And I absolutely agree with that. I think the school system and school systems have a very vital role to play in the perpetuation of our democracy. The environment needs to be such that all viewpoints are a part of the conversation, and the discourse that we need to teach the discourse and how to have discourse and how to argue in a friendly way, and so that all viewpoints are considered. And I think that in order to preserve our republic and our democracy, I think that's going to be a very important role as we move forward, given the current climate that we face in the political arena. More conversation, and the teachers are fearful of having conversations lest they get themselves caught up into a troubling situation, and that really has to be part of the inquiry, part of the conversation about how do we approach these topics as educators, and how do we teach our children that just because someone has an opposing viewpoint, that there might be things within that viewpoint that could inform your decisions as well. And so I think that's a really great question, and something for all school systems across our nation to be thinking about the role that we play in ensuring that politics and democracy and the republic are protected.
And education is the backbone to our democracy.
Absolutely.
So we have a moral obligation to teach our kids, and education seems to cycle every few decades. So I think going back to civics education, going back to the core, the old character ed days, those process skills, soft skills that we need to teach our kids, how to collaborate, how to work with each other. I think those are the skills that are needed that we need to bring back to our schools. On top of, again, teaching those civics education all the way through, and making sure kids understand, again, how to work with each other and how to talk to each other. Because I think in the age of technology, what I see often is, when you go to your cafeterias, what do you see? You see kids pulling out their cell phones and doing a lot of this. is we're not engaging in discourse and how to work together and teaching kids how to collaborate and work well together and communicate. So.
And I agree with my colleagues in terms of the fact that we have a responsibility. And I would just add by saying, if not us, who? And if not now, when? I think it is a responsibility, and to collaborate and to engage and to bring the community into our schools and to ensure that our young people are prepared for life. And so, hence, I agree with what my colleagues have said, and I think that we need to make sure we're moving in that direction.
I think
Or
too,
that we continue.
one other thing that has influenced what you see in our school systems is this quest to prove our effectiveness by that one test, that one day, one moment in time. And we have sacrificed many of the skills that were in our schools so that we can prove that we're effective. And we're allowing this false narrative about what that test represents to override all of the pieces that we need to be teaching, but we're afraid to do it because we're going to be labeled as a failing school or as a D school or an A school for that matter. And so I think that the education community is a very powerful community, and I don't think we leverage that enough. I think we sort of sit back and let the world happen to us. But collectively and working together, what you will discover is we can really name the game, and we can make it be what we wish for it to be. But we have to be on the same team, and unfortunately, we just haven't gotten there yet. But I see that that's something to strive for in the future.
I'm just gonna do shameless self-promotion here. We've had a 18-month so far. It keeps going. Civics Education Reporting Project.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of resources at EdWeek. If any of you are interested, please come find me afterwards. I'll give you bootleg copies, so or whatever, so that you can see it. And I know we had one final question, and then I will turn it to Dan.
Christy Tanvik, I'm Superintendent Buckeye Elementary School District. First of all, congratulations to each and every one of you for being here. We are closer to 2050 than we are 1990. And I wanted to ask each of you what you are doing in your buildings in the world of design, in design space, to prepare students and teachers for that collective thinking and collaboration that you guys spoke of.
So in Eugene, Oregon, really fortunate in Eugene, we've recently passed the largest bond in county history of $319 million, and we've continued to build buildings. Not that we're growing, my community expects what they expect, and again, what we're doing is designing buildings a little differently in terms of more open spaces and also more collaborative spaces for our kids. The middle school that we built 2 years ago, and I was a middle school person for 9 years at the building level, is I believe it's the best middle school I've ever seen, just because of the fact that the learning spaces and the ability to have kids be able to have space for themselves. And also the collaborative spaces that we see for our teaching staff. Open spaces, open rooms to be able to have discourse, but also the flexible spaces I see for my science wings. Having really open spaces that can be flexed into 2 or 3 rooms, which is pretty essential. And having, again, the buildings of today with plugins for our kiddos is something that, again, we're going to continue to see. But again, the design and working with staff and working with kids in terms of what they need in the design phase. So right now we're building a high school, 2 elementaries right now, and working strongly with community in terms of what they need. And that is in surveys for the past 10 builds that we've had for the last 10 years, but also, again, looking at the future in terms of working with architects in terms of what could be. So.
I think retrofitting classrooms, if you're not building new, retrofitting classrooms, something as simple as paint, stop making white walls, and put some color in classrooms. We use the, I don't know if we use the Starbucks concept where we have soft seating, we have high top seating, we have low top seating, everything moves. We discourage desks in rows, and it forces our teachers to think differently about teaching and learning, because we're one-to-one, so there's not a lot of time at a board lecturing. It's really a lot of hands-on. I think if we want to see the 4 Cs embedded, we need to change our curriculum and change the way we think about teaching, because you have to embed work that forces collaboration and forces creativity, not just ask for it. So, but we have an allocation in our budget every year to outfit 20 new classrooms with flexible furniture. We're almost done with the 5th cycle of that. And the change, just the discourse you see with kids communicate, it's unbelievable when you walk in. And it's glaring when you walk into a class that still has the old furniture. It really, it's
Interesting.
it's really interesting.
Pretty much the same things that we're working on, equipping all of our classrooms with all of the most ergonomically appropriate furniture in the classrooms to create collaborative spaces and collaborative environments. We're also working with teachers a little bit differently, because the type of teaching is not sit and get. It is problems of practice and allowing kids, not problems of practice, but problems for kids to serve, to address in their classrooms related to the content that we're teaching. And many of our teachers are still, they're not there yet in terms of the creativity necessary to start with a problem and then use the skills and allow the students to explore and examine the multiple solutions to a problem. We're accustomed to teaching multiplication the same, this is how you do it, and not how that there are multiple ways to arrive at the same solution. So while you're creating the aesthetic environment to support the 21st century competencies, you're also having to bolster up the teaching workforce and your ideas of what kids will need as they graduate from high school and move on into their lives. And the environment is one piece, but ensuring that all of our staff, and it's just a different mindset, a different approach to teaching and learning that requires the fundamentals, but also looks at it through a different lens.
And we're doing likewise as with the colleagues. Our industry councils have very much a major role in helping to redesign classrooms in terms of the learning spaces. So in the 4 high schools, quickly, for example, at one high school, we redesigned, and now through Maritime, we have an academy there, and we have redesigned, and so welding, we have a lab in there for welding and the alike in terms of the Maritime Academy. At another high school, the Industry Council helped us in terms of conversations and redesign in terms of cybersecurity, for the Cybersecurity Academy. So now we have a cybersecurity lab, and so it has the same functions as a true cybersecurity in terms of that. The other, hospitality and tourism, we redesigned the classroom space in a high school to ensure that the young people have what they need in terms of the appropriate equipment and so forth for that particular academy as well. So we are redesigning. At another high school, for example, we have in the health sciences the lab where you have a 3D anatomy and the table, and so they can take a close look at various parts of the body and so forth. So that, through the health sciences and the industry council leaders redesigning the lab and the space there. And then finally, I would just sort of kind of pull to the forefront the law and public safety, where we have begun to really redesign. And in one section of the law and public safety, you have the driving simulator where you can get in and you're driving an emergency vehicle and you experience all that a person would experience if they were driving the emergency vehicle and so forth. So, so we are redesigning, and the concept of the fact, I think what Riley said, that we're preparing young people for jobs that don't exist, using technologies that have not been created in order to solve problems that we don't even know that are problems yet. So that's the thinking around the redesign.
and I couldn't remember, I said problems of practice, and actually what I meant to say was the engineering design practice, where we look at the problem, and then we try to solve the problem, and we test and retest until we get there. So it's just a design thinking model, is really where we need to go, and instead of perhaps what we're doing at the moment.
All right, Dan's gonna wrap this all up.
Well, Michael, Samantha, Gustavo, Jeffrey, let's give them a hand. One of the things I get to do, that's why I love my job as much as I do, is I get to travel all over the country. And I get to go into school districts, and I get to go into classrooms and talk to kids. And it's, you hear what they've done, but I tell you, it's so much more impressive when you are actually there and you see it happening. And that's to your credit for what you have done in your communities. And thank you so much for your contributions to the education of our students and for being here today. And Stephen, thank you so much for moderating. Thank you all for being here, part of this. If you want to know the result of all of this, be in San Diego, where the finalists will be, the winner will be announced. Thank you very much.